In light of what we heard from the head of NATO, Mark Rutte, as well as the Prime Minister, are we getting closer to seeing the contours of what a settlement might look like?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure if we're going to see the contours of a deal anytime soon, but what we are seeing is everyone is preparing for the fact that this will be different next year. I mean, into next year, after Christmas, into the spring, however long it may take, the dynamics of this war are going to be different because the politics on the outside are different. And most people believe that we are heading towards some sort of truce or ceasefire. It certainly won't be a peace deal because there's almost no way you can make peace between what Russia wants and Ukraine's ability to stay alive. As they always say, it's very hard to negotiate with somebody who's trying to kill you. So we'll see some sort of, maybe a truce, maybe a ceasefire. And what the Western allies are saying is that we want to give Ukraine as much leverage as and when that takes place. But what the outlines of a deal could be, I mean, everyone's got ideas, I could give you half a dozen different ideas now, but where it's going to go when President-elect Trump becomes president, nobody knows. And, of course, he keeps... I mean, one of his sources of power is that he keeps people frightened of him and frightened of his unpredictability. And, in a way, that is a strength. It wears off after a few years, I have to say. But, I mean, for now, his unpredictability is some sort of source of strength. So he's got everybody running around trying to come up with things, and that gives them options to play with. And so we're talking about some sort of freezing of the front lines somewhere. And then some sort of way of securing that truce, that ceasefire, so that it doesn't break down within 6 months or a year.
What does that look like in that eventuality that you can have a deal?
It looks like a very long line. I mean, if the ceasefire line, on the line of contact at the moment in Ukraine, say from, there you go, from north to south, that's 600 miles, about 1,000 kilometres. So if you want to have a demilitarised zone of, let's guess, 15 miles or 20 kilometres either side of that line, who's going to be there? I mean, which troops? UN forces, NATO forces? It can't be NATO forces, almost certainly not, but it might be European forces or Western forces. And so a line of neutral troops, and the idea of being maybe European troops, not under NATO's banner, but individually, as it were, let's say a brigade of British troops, a brigade of German troops, a brigade of French troops or whatever, and they would sit along that line and dare the Russians to attack them. Now, that's a pretty dangerous situation, but that's one way in which you might try to stabilise this. If you tried to stabilise it through declarations, then nobody would believe them. Yeah. I mean, President Putin hasn't stuck to any declaration that he's made over defence issues since 1999. So, declarations won't matter. I mean, practical things will matter, and that's what it might begin to look like. And then there's Kursk. I mean, the Ukrainians have got this little enclave in Kursk, which they are holding on to. And it's an interesting little footnote to this. The Russians showed all the signs about 2 or 3 weeks ago of trying to mount an attack on Zaporizhia, to move westwards, further south in Zaporizhia. And they had 2 divisions of troops ready to go. And they had to move them up to the Kursk enclave because they weren't doing very well up there. The Ukrainians have put more into holding the 60% of that enclave they've still got. And it actually, although the Kursk enclave attempt hasn't really worked out the way the Ukrainians wanted, it hasn't really relieved pressure in the south, but it does seem to have forestalled an attack on Zaporizhia, at least for maybe a month or 2 months. It gives them time to strengthen Zaporizhia, and they are digging in like there's no tomorrow around Zaporizhia now to try to protect it better for something after Christmas, maybe.
Of course, Kursk is where those North Koreans are.
And 10,000 North Koreans are in Kursk, and if that is successful as an experiment, there'll be a lot more North Koreans there before too long. It's in Ukraine's interest to try to make life as uncomfortable as possible for the North Koreans to make sure that the experiment fails.